From managing finances of India's largest bank to now tackling major global challenges, Anshula Kant is one of the most respected bankers in the world. She joins me from Washington to talk about her journey and how, as the managing director and CFO of the World Bank, she is addressing critical issues such as climate change and inequality. Stay tuned to Pathbreakers. I am Neha Bothra. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am, today on Pathbreakers. It's so good to see you after 5 years.
Good to see you again after many years.
Should we go back to 1988 when you actually joined State Bank of India?
Yeah, it was actually 1983. So it's been a long time since I started work at State Bank of India. When I look back, I feel that the grounding I got working for the largest public sector commercial bank in India, it was a very good grounding for me to work at the World Bank after maybe 35 years of working at State Bank of India. In many ways, it is very different, but in many ways, the problems and the challenges that we are trying to solve remain equally relevant. India is also, let me put it upfront, one of the largest clients for World Bank. So a lot of the learnings I got from State Bank of India are very relevant, and I'm putting them to good use at the World Bank actually.
You grew up in Roorkee. Now that's a place, where you would expect most people to be drawn towards engineering. And here you are taking up economics at a time when there weren't that many job offers for women to take on at that point. Tell us a bit about that.
So Neha, I grew up on the Roorkee University campus. My dad was teaching there for many years. He was a very renowned civil engineer and he retired as the vice chancellor of Roorkee University. So it was a great life, growing up in the campus. And yes, engineering was the obvious choice. My dad was an engineer. My brothers, sisters are all more or less engineers. And in those days, Neha, you were too young to know it, but you could either be an engineer or a doctor. So those were the two things that parents thought, will get you a good job. My dad said that, if you want to study engineering, there's no better place than Roorkee University. Please study here. I was actually very keen to leave the cocoon of the family home and Roorkee and try out new things in a new city. That drove the decision of doing economics. And economics has a lot of maths and statistics going into it. I enjoy maths. So I thought, please let me try economics and go to Delhi University. I applied and I did my undergrad from Lady Shri Ram College for 3 years with economic honors. And then I went on to Delhi School of Economics for a master's. My parents actually were very liberal minded, very enlightened people, very well read, always encouraging their kids to aim for big things, aim for doing their best, aim for working hard. So, that's the grounding I got with the feeling that I could do anything, I could achieve anything. There was no difference between boys and girls in our household,
When you started out at State Bank of India, your first stint was at Roorkee, right?
I know. I still wonder, what drove State Bank of India to post. There was something called the probationary period. So probationers went through this 2-year probation period. So I was there for the first branch probation, which was just a few months. This was learning on the job. There's no banking course as such. So you have to learn on the job. And those 2 years of probation, through which I rotated through 5 branches in different parts of Uttar Pradesh and different parts of the banking field, so retail banking, a little bit of SME, a little bit of foreign exchange and rural banking. So I did a little bit of everything over those 2 years, as all probationers did at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big lot of learning on the job. It was a steep learning curve during those 2 years.
You've had a very rich experience of dealing in different portfolios at State Bank of India, be it retail, be it treasury. You've been in different cities, starting from Roorkee to Varanasi to Lucknow, and you were also the CEO of the Singapore unit of State Bank of India. Tell us a bit about the key learnings in these diverse roles at State Bank of India.
Some of them are personal. I got married and my husband was living and working in Varanasi. So I had to take an intercircle transfer. Varanasi was one of, it's in East UP and not too many women were working at that time, especially in jobs, public service. And in some ways, it was, I never wore saris till that time. So I started wearing saris once I got posted to Varanasi. 2 reasons. One, to look a little older and to find more acceptance within the clients and the customers that we were serving in East. These are some of the soft skills that you learn as you grow into the job.
Sure.
The bigger challenge was, of course, on the professional side. Like I said, I didn't know much about banking. And, when I got posted as a first time branch manager in a small rural branch, I was the youngest person there to head the branch. All my staff and my team were older than me, more experienced than me. They were actually very, very good. Most of my colleagues wanted me to come up to speed. They were very protective of me in some ways. So it was a very male dominated environment. Most of your customers are male, your colleagues are male. There is this protective cocoon that comes from your colleagues. It's not out of any ill will or trying to put you down. It is how they would behave with their daughters, their sisters. They like to be protective. So I think this is something that I needed to sort of overcome and convince folks that, look, I can do it. I will be able to do it. I'm game for trying and trying to meet these challenges. I think what I learned through this journey was, it's important to have self confidence, have the confidence that you will be able to do things, you will be able to achieve things, and don't anticipate all the problems. If you anticipate all challenges, all problems, and then you try to take decisions, you end up not sort of taking the big step forward. So I think it's really important to opt for challenging assignments, assignments which interest you. You are working for 10, 11 hours a day. It's important to be interested and be passionate about what you're doing. So that was the other thing I learned. In State Bank of India, you get transferred out every few years.
Mm-hmm.
When I had to leave Varanasi, in Varanasi, my husband he's a chartered accountant. He had his practice there. I was living with my in-laws and my husband with a very comfortable family setup. I had my two kids, lots of support from my husband, lots of support from my parents-in-law. I would say I lucked out. It was easy for me in the earlier years. And then came the big choice, that one had to make. I was looking at a transfer out of Varanasi, moving out of the family home. And the choice was that you opt for career development and career growth and move out, or you can sort of stay at a very, junior, low middle level through your career and don't move out. So we took a collective decision and I moved out. It came with all of its challenges you can imagine. I was living alone with my kids in Lucknow, full-time work, full-time mom. So yes, a lot of hired help support. The fact that State Bank had staff housing in most cities helped a lot. It was a very safe and secure environment for my kids when they came back from school. Lots of support from friends and colleagues living in that housing complex. And my parents-in-law and my husband, of course, were always behind. They had my back. So if ever I needed, they used to drive down from Varanasi and come and spend time there. For the school holidays and summer vacations were all at Varanasi for my kids. So the fact is that you do need good childcare support facilities for women to continue to succeed and work in their careers.
Mm-hmm. I think that point is very important because many women tend to quit at that point.
So those are difficult choices which each one of us have to make. One other thing I learned was that I never hesitated to take help, whether it was from friends, colleagues, relatives. And there are difficult moments. I think all of us go through them. Neha, I don't have regrets. I can't for a moment imagine not working or not being passionate about my career, because that defines me as much as being a daughter or a daughter-in-law or a wife or a mom.
I want to also ask you a bit about your leadership lessons. At State Bank of India, you dealt with so many crises. I mean, demonetization is just one, the first one that comes to mind. Policy flip-flops, angry customers. How did you go through that tumultuous period in India at that point?
It just goes to show that, you live in an uncertain world. It's a very complex, very fluid, uncertain world ecosystem that you're operating in. So I think you have to prepare for the unexpected. I know it's a little bit of an oxymoron to say prepare for the unexpected, but you have to be prepared that things may not pan out exactly as you had planned or thought. So what is my second option? A lot of it is about decision making at the crucial moments. A decision delayed is in some ways decision denied. So you need to take timely decisions, because execution and delivery is extremely important when you are a banker. I would say in any field, but more so when you are a banker. I think some of it is, giving your job or the job at hand your 100%. And I think it's important, whenever you take decisions at these critical and sensitive moments, it's important to try and first see whether you can do the right thing. That sort of de-stresses a lot of the angst you may have. For instance, in most situations in State Bank of India, you would keep the customer at the center of your decision making. And of course, your staff and your colleagues, and do the right thing. That sort of decreases the stress in many ways. It also adds to your credibility. To lead or to be successful, you need to be credible. You need people to believe in you. It's important to be credible. It's important to be transparent and consistent. And I think it's important to be always learning, always listening. You have to be flexible and you have to be able to change your mind.
Also, the NPA crisis that really shook the foundations of many banks. State Bank of India came out stronger after this crisis. Tell us a bit about the risk compliance frameworks that you put in place at that time. Because if you look at State Bank of India now, when it comes to capital, it seems to be among the best placed. And you put in the seeds at that point. So what exactly was your strategy? You were thinking 10 years on.
A lot of the credit for that goes to our regulators. Reserve Bank of India is a great regulator. They have been, very, very pragmatic, and yet again, it's about doing the right thing. So calling an NPA when it needs to be called an NPA is important. As a CFO, you have to try and see that your balance sheet is strong. Yes. And it's not just about the parameters that you put out, but it's also about the underlying strength, whether you've made adequate provisions, whether it is for NPAs, whether it is for pensions, whether it is for any other risks that bankers face. So it was together with the senior leadership in the bank and very much under the guidance of the regulators, I think we were able to get to a place, and I feel very proud when I see State Bank of India doing so well today.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, I think it's about, again, being transparent, being credible, and also about putting in place policies, procedures, and frameworks which allow us to deliver this transparency in a consistent manner, so that it doesn't remain person dependent.
Interestingly, a year after you took over at the World Bank, the world was in the middle of a never seen before pandemic. The COVID pandemic. It was a crisis of a different magnitude. Everyone was looking to the World Bank, especially the low-income countries, for support. At this point, how did you navigate these challenges of expectation that was sky high very often?
Neha, rightfully so. I mean, this is where the World Bank really comes into its own, because that's, I would say, serving clients through times of crisis and times of elevated needs is what we are best at doing. I remember I was just 6 months into the job when we went into a complete lockdown. A few things I want to mention is the huge strength of this institution, that it happened seamlessly. We all switched to working from home. The technology held up, the people held up, the systems and processes, all of them held up very well. And I think it took us not more than a month or two to realize that it's one of the biggest crises we've ever faced and the countries need help. So that's when, we put our heads together. There was a lot of strength in the World Bank balance sheet. We were able to step up and lean forward. We immediately increased our financing capacity for the most vulnerable countries. We put together COVID-related programs. We got them through very quickly, as quickly as possible. I think we responded extremely well at this time of crisis. And, let me just remind you, Neha, that World Bank is one of the very few entities which are rated AAA. So our financial model is that we have capital from shareholders, but for liquidity and for supporting our balance sheet lending, we raise $40 to $50 billion every year from the bond markets. And given the turbulence due to COVID, I was a little concerned whether we will still have this unfettered access to the bond markets. And because of the strength of our AAA rating, we continued seamless access to bond markets. We were able to raise money, and we actually stocked up on liquidity in many ways so that we would not be found wanting on that front as we deliver to our client countries during that time. It was a tough time, a huge setback for many of our countries, especially the low-income countries. All the gains that we had made over the previous 2 or 3 decades in terms of poverty eradication, in terms of education, girls going to school, health, maternal health. A lot of setbacks happened during that time, and we are still working through our programs to, in some ways, of course, to catch up, but also to further progress from where we are today.
Mm-hmm. We live in a very different world. I think it's almost as if the pandemic has pushed us into a new normal and we are coping. So, how do you think the financing model of the World Bank needs to evolve to respond to many of the new challenges, be it inequality, be it being prepared for another pandemic like COVID, for instance?
Very good question, Neha. In fact, for the last more than 1 year now, we have been on a process of reforming the World Bank. But just to step back for a minute, you think about the challenges the world is facing today, like you mentioned, climate, of course, health related, pandemic prevention, crisis prevention. Mm-hmm. And there is these significant instances of conflict, which we see are happening with more frequency across the world. The debt problem is a huge problem for a low-income country, especially. There is high degree of indebtedness. Fiscal space is very limited to deal with these challenges. So, the needs are high. There are geopolitical tensions at a time when, when your needs are high. For instance, trade is taking a setback. When you really need to be globalized, you need to, maximize on all opportunities possible. There are geopolitical tensions and conflicts. So I would say that the multilateral development banks, multilateral institutions are even more important during these times because, although we are a cooperative owned by all our countries, shareholder countries and borrowing countries collectively, we support all countries who are our clients across the board. So in terms of what we are doing better, what we are trying to do different to rise up to the challenges of current times. So one, of course, we have tweaked our vision and mission statement a little. We used to have something called the twin goals: eradicate poverty and inequality. Now our vision says eradicate poverty on a livable planet. And livable planet, of course, means deal with the climate effects, climate change impacts, but also beyond that, whether young people have jobs, whether girls go to school, whether there is adequate health facilities, etc. So we have broadened our vision. And to deliver on that, we realize that we need to be more efficient, we need to be more productive, we need to be more accessible to clients, we need to be more agile. So there are a lot of efforts that are going on to make us more efficient in terms of speed, in terms of volumes, in terms of impact at scale. In terms of what we bring unique to the table for the clients is also, I would say, in a big way, is knowledge. It's not just financing. Because we operate across the world in different parts of the world, more than 130 countries we have offices in. There are learnings, there are lessons that we learn, best practices that we learn, that global knowledge we use to support our clients as they formulate their programs and policies. And then, of course, supported by adequate financing, that's really important. So what we are doing differently is we have a very strong balance sheet. Are there efficiencies to be pulled out of the balance sheet? Can you do more from the same capital? Can you do more from the same resources without taking so much risk that your AAA rating may be at risk itself? So that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to create innovations through new structures, new products, which will deliver more from the same capital base. It's an important strategy for us to work better with partners in delivering client needs, country needs. Neha, it's almost impossible for any one institution to meet all the needs that are out there. And if we are able to work better with partners who are in the same space as us, including the private sector, we are also trying to bring in the private sector to see if they can join forces with us to deliver on these development needs. So it's a lot of work in progress, I would say, but we are on the journey, and I think we've made good progress in the last 12 to 14 months collectively.
You pointed out the various challenges that World Bank has in the process of discharging its duties from the funds it raises. How are you looking to address those? For instance, speed up the pace of clearing the projects, enhance operational efficiency, simplify the loan approval process. Are these key areas that the World Bank is trying to make simpler in the coming time?
Oh, yes, very much so. It needs a lot of, I would say, collaboration from across the ecosystem. One is to enhance countries' capacity to absorb funds at a faster pace. So we are working with our clients to enhance their capacity. Within ourselves, we are looking at it from every step of the way, from the time when we start conceptualizing the project to the time when it actually gets approved by the board, and from then on to when we can start disbursing the funds to the client country. So we are looking at each and every step of the process to see where efficiencies can be improved, what needs to be done. And here's the thing, Neha, institutions like ours are also subject to a lot of expectations in terms of
Yes.
being transparent, to follow the best practices, whether they're environment related, social related. We have these things called the ESF frameworks. We tick all the boxes when we actually say yes to a project. For instance, we shouldn't harm the environment. We shouldn't exacerbate the climate change problem. It should be good for gender equality. There are multiple things that we tick boxes
Yes.
on so that we don't harm the society. What we are trying to do is not dilute these standards in any way, but make sure that a risk based approach is taken so that we assess and comply with these standards, but in a more risk based and nimble manner. So this is what we are trying to do. We are also working with other multilateral development banks. It's also about, of course, training, skilling our own people, better communication from the headquarters and corporate teams to the country teams who are actually on the ground and delivering these projects. So we are looking at it in its entirety. And let me say, Neha, now the huge focus is on what is the impact that we are making? What is the outcome we are looking for? So while how many dollars you put in for education, how many dollars you put in for health is important, very important. But what is also important is to measure the outcome and impact that we make. We are looking for good outcomes, and we are looking for doing projects which are scalable, which are replicable in different parts of the world, and trying to solve for the big problems in many ways.
Asia is being seen as the next growth driver in the world. What feedback do you get when you interact with the clients of World Bank? How are they now looking at Asia, and how is the World Bank trying to accelerate the growth possibilities in emerging markets in this region?
We work very closely with the government authorities. South Asia and particularly India is one of the bright spots in the world, with one of the fastest growing economy there. It supports the global growth in many ways, which is not looking too great this year. But you have to sort of slice and dice the needs of different countries. For instance, in Africa, currently, we've identified 3 or 4 top priorities. One of them is energy access. Currently, we have a program which is being put in place where we are working with other partners and we're working with multiple governments across Africa to make sure that at least 100 million or even more than 100 million people get access to energy over the next 5 to 7 years. Different countries have different challenges and different problems. India is at a much different place where investment needs are at the highest, and that's what the government of India is trying to do, and we are available for support in any areas and projects that they need.
Of course, in India, we see a huge infrastructure push. The government is trying to boost employment. Capital expenditure has also gone up. How do you think this is actually panning out for India?
India is a very large economy. It's a very large country. Their development needs are huge, and
Yes.
most of them are met by their own resources. Where we come in is the pockets where we can bring some expertise, we can bring some support, where the government would like us to lean forward to support them. The programs that we do are part of the big whole that the government of India is trying to achieve. So we have a great relationship with the country, and a strong program that is going on from the IFC as well as from IBRD. We are working across multiple sectors. I'm aware, it's in the renewable energy space, in the road space, in the energy space. So there are agriculture. There are a lot of projects in agriculture, water. So there are multiple sectors we work in. We work with multiple state governments, of course, through the central government.
In light of the various risks that we see in the world emanating from wars and also the big climate crisis that we spoke about earlier, how is the World Bank looking at growth at this juncture with so much uncertainty around us?
So, Neha, you are right. I think this will be the third year our economists are expecting a slightly slower growth than last year at 2.4% globally. It's more or less across the world. There are pockets which are really doing well. India is one of them. The US economy is growing very well. There is a perceptible slower growth momentum over the last 2 or 3 years, although in some pockets there has been a pickup. This year we expect it to remain challenging because of the significant tightening that has happened across the
Sure.
markets in response to elevated inflation. The debt challenges are huge. That is a very, very critical challenge which multiple countries across the world are facing. Limited fiscal space, all of that leads to lower development outcomes, and that is the challenge we are facing today. And added to that are the conflicts which impact supply chains, they impact trade routes, they impact food insecurity, extreme climate events. It's a confluence of challenges, but I am optimistic because we see pockets of growth and economies which are doing well, and most of our programs are geared to take up these challenges. Hopefully we should be able to work through them in the next 1 or 2 years.
So you're optimistic of a soft landing after the very tight interest rate cycle that we saw?
Optimistic maybe a too strong a word, but yeah, I guess slow touchdown to a soft landing over the next 12 months, maybe yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out time and speaking with us on a whole range of issues. I'm so grateful that you joined us on Path Breakers today.
It was a pleasure, Neha. Thank you.